Hey, this is John here tonight. I got a little something different for you. I've done an interview with Chuck Harter. He has just written a book called Mr. Novak. It's about a television show from the 60s, and it's a pretty amazing book. We got about 35 minutes of a conversation here. I want to apologize. My audio on my side's a little light, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm very excited to be talking with Chuck Harter. Chuck is an author, musician, and popular cultural consultant. Our main subject tonight is his latest book, Mr. Novak, which is his 5th book. Mr. Novak is an extensive reference to the television show, complete with episodes, guides, a wealth of interesting photographers, the Mr. Novak game, and the body of the book that places the show in the context of the social importance. But I'm also very interested in talking about Chuck's television documentary, Hey, Hey, We're the Monkeys. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be here with me.
Well, thank you, John. It's nice to be with you. So let's begin. What can I do for you, sir?
I was reading your bio, and I see that you studied dramatic arts psychiatry at Lynchburg College. Have you ever worked in that field?
Well, yes and no. I didn't finish college. I finished 3 years, and then, for various reasons, had to leave. Many years later, in the late 70s, I came to Los Angeles and ended up working in the rock music field, if you will. I was the stage and light manager at the famous Troubadour Club, played in bands, knew a lot of musicians, became a studio engineer as well. So with all of that craziness going on, you can say I actually used my dramatic arts and psychiatry majors in the Los Angeles music scene.
I see. Okay. Well, you have a fondness for television, and you're an expert on popular culture.
I don't know if I'm an expert, but it is an interest of mine.
Okay. Well, how has pop culture and television in particular affected your life view and work?
Well, I'm a baby boomer, so, I grew up with television and, watched many shows and, knew about the news and so forth from it. Like so many people, I do remember when JFK was assassinated and seeing Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated, and, what a shock it was. I think television is very much a part of our lives, still is, even with the rise of the Internet and social media and that sort of thing. TV is still very big. So it taught me an appreciation, I guess, for production, drama, comedy, documentaries, just the ways that shows could be put together to entertain and inform. And many years later, I have worked in documentaries and film, and I've, used a lot of what I guess subconsciously learned early on in ways to make a living, and also as an enjoyable professional hobby, you might say. But I think it just impacted me as it does everyone, really. I learned a lot. I was entertained, and it made me question things and want to learn about things. And I think that's really what the best of TV can do.
Oh, fantastic. I have to ask you this question. How does one, about your last documentary show, how does one become an expert on the Monkey television show, a show that's had a profound influence on the development of my humor?
Well, that's, oh boy, we don't have 9 hours, but, it's funny about that, and it's interesting to talk about that. I didn't know we were, but we will. I was a kid when the Monkees came out, and I watched the show and liked it, as a show, and of course then the records came out and I bought them. Because as a kid I was a very much a music fan. I bought singles and albums by the Beatles and Rolling Stones and the Kinks and the Beach Boys and, that kind of thing. And I really liked the Monkees. I watched, I think, most of the shows in the 2 seasons. I don't remember seeing Head, the feature film. I was kind of young, and I don't think I saw it at the time. It didn't play in many places, and at that time I lived in Northern Virginia in a town called Alexandria, just outside of Washington, D.C. So the years go by, and I certainly was aware of the Monkees from the reruns and that sort of thing. And then in the early 90s, I put together a Monkees tribute band called the Missing Links, in which I played Michael Nesmith. And we had lookalikes and a fifth guy who played Chip Douglas, their producer, so we could duplicate the recordings as a live unit. So there were the five of us, and everybody looked like them. We were all very good. And we gigged for about a year, and then as happens in bands, it blew up, and I quit. The funny thing was, is after I left, the fake Monkees, if you will, I ended up getting hired to do the documentary for Rhino Disney, Hey, Hey, We're the Monkees, and ended up working with all four real Monkees because I interviewed them. I did a lot on that show. And what was gratifying to me as a fan of them as a kid was that all four of them, after the documentary aired, in their own ways, told me that they really liked it. So full circle.
Oh, that's very nice. That's wonderful. I want to go ahead and just jump on over to your fifth book here now, Mr. Novak. How did you decide to work on this project?
Well, I can tell you that. It's an odd but interesting story. When the show originally aired in the early 60s, I was a little kid, and I didn't watch it because we were a single TV family, as so many families were. And there was a popular war show opposite called Combat with Vic Morrow. Right. Now my dad was Air Force, so naturally we watched Combat. However, James Franciscus, the star of Mr. Novak, was an incredibly handsome guy and was in the teen magazines like Teen Screen or 16 or those kind of things. So the little girls would bring the magazines into their classes, and I would at least see him. Oh, the handsome guy from the show. So the years go by, and for various reasons, Mr. Novak never reran until the late 80s briefly, and I didn't see any of those. But about 3 years ago, a guy I know in New York who's a friend sent me some underground music DVDs, because that's what he does for a living. He manufactures them. And in it was a stack of DVDs marked Mr. Novak. I didn't put two and two together, and I called him up, and I said, Bruce, what is that? What's Mr. Novak? Oh, that's that old show from the 60s, Chuck. I know you like 60s stuff. Oh, yeah, the teacher show. That's right. So I thought about it, and I went, do I even want to watch this? It's probably corny and dated and old, and I just set them aside. So about 3.5 weeks later, I was about to pack them away permanently, and I thought, you know what, Bruce did send them. I ought to at least watch one, to be polite. He did send them as a gift. So I put on the pilot, first year, first day. And I got to say, halfway through it, I was going, wait a minute, this is really good. Intelligent writing, acting, production. It was really, really good and not dated. By the end of the first episode, I was going, this is really an amazing show. Why is it forgotten? On the same disc was a second episode called The Risk. And this was about a former alcoholic teacher who is clean, who wants to come back to the high school, and should they rehire him? And it was beautifully played. It was wonderful. And after that second one, I went, you know what? This show is amazing. It holds up great. It's just first class all the way. Why is this forgotten? So I went on the box and tried to order a book on Mr. Novak, and there wasn't one. So I thought, maybe there's something in a biography of James Franciscus, and there wasn't one. Well, what do I do now? So I snooped around the internet, and I found a teacher in Florida who's still teaching, and he basically had a love letter website to the show about how great it was and how it helped him be a better teacher when he began. It helped other young people he knew become teachers or made them want to be teachers. And he said he had some more episodes, and I went, well, okay. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? I'm going to write it. I have to let people know about this incredible show that's been forgotten. So I got a publishing deal, and 3 years later, here we are.
Oh, fantastic. That's a fantastic story. That kind of leads into the next question I wanted to ask. This is it's a rather amazing book, and everything in it is so well documented.
Oh, well, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. How'd you get access to all the photographs and background material?
Well, several ways. I checked eBay every day. I found quite a bit of background material at the Motion Picture Academy Margaret Herrick Library here in Beverly Hills near me. I belonged to 4 vintage newspaper sites, and I combed through them, for the pertinent years. And pretty early on, I was checking the regulars of the cast members to see who to interview, and sadly, they'd all passed away except one. Her name was Marion Collier, and she played Miss Scott, the home ec teacher on the show. So I got her on the phone, and she was very nice, a very excitable elderly lady, and apparently she was this way in the 60s, so it was the same. And she said, come on up to the house. I think I have some photos and some articles or something. And I said, yeah, fine, great. So I went up and got to the house and went inside, and big house way up high in the Hollywood Hills. And there was a big table in the middle of the room. And on the table were some photographs and magazines and so forth. And I said, oh, boy, this is great. Thank you so much. She said, oh, didn't I tell you? 5 years after the show ended, I married E. Jack Newman, the series creator and executive producer, and I'm his widow. All of his files are here. His archive is here. What? And she said, yeah, come with me. And she said, oh, well, there's all 60 scripts. If you need any to copy, go ahead. Well, I was, as you can well imagine, very pleased with all of this. And we went back in the living room, and standing on a table was what looked like a large bowling trophy. And I picked it up, and it said, the National Education Association Award for Excellence to Mr. Novak, 1964. And I said, what's this? Oh, that's one of the many awards the show won. Really? Oh, come with me. So we went in another office, and I pulled down a big box, and there were like 14 more awards for the show. And there are pictures of all of these awards on the website for the book, which is MrNovakBook.com. That's MrNovakBook.com, MrNovakBook.com. And so, I was very pleased with all of this, and I eventually went through the rest of the files and found more material. And, she was a big help. And then slowly but surely, I contacted some fans of the show, and they kicked some things in, and it just grew. And it was very gratifying that literally, except for a handful, everybody I contacted, whether it was actors on the show, technicians, a writer, students who were extras, and so forth, every single one of them, the minute I mentioned Mr. Novak, boom, yes, absolutely, they'll do an interview. They'll see if they have anything, and they all cooperated. And a lot of times the actors had not seen their episode in 50-plus years or had never seen it because, remember, it didn't rerun. So I sent them discs with their episodes, and they were all knocked out. Every single one of them said they couldn't believe how great the show is, how it holds up, how it's not dated, how it's timeless, the themes are still relevant to today's schools, and everything. And the batting average for people being excited about this was 100%. So I was really, so I was really happy that I was able to get such a good response. And then, it just kept building and building and building because I wanted it to be a visual book. And the book has 300-plus images in it, so it's very visual. And let me add at this point, the book is available, Mr. Novak, an acclaimed television series by Chuck Harter, which is available at Amazon.com and BearManorMedia.com. That's BearManor Media.com. The book is available in hardback, paperback, and ebook editions.
Okay, yeah, I was going to hit that at the end, too, again.
Throw a few in.
Yeah, I was going to
just throw a few in. It always helps.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Martin Landau. Let me tell you about Martin Landau. It's both happy and tragic, I'm afraid. I contacted him fairly early on, and he was very, very nice, a real gentleman. He was. I mean, I don't think anybody has anything bad to say about him. He was certainly a great actor, but he was really nice to me. And I mentioned Mr. Novak, and he said, okay, sure, but can you send me the episodes I was in? And he was in two really good episodes, so I sent them. And the same thing. He was knocked out. He couldn't believe that they weren't dated, and, he had a lot of good things to say about them. And he was very nice. And I said, well, Marty, would you mind writing the foreword for the book? He said, oh, I'd be honored to. Lad. It's funny, he called me Lad. I'm more than a lad, let me tell you, but it was nice to hear. But he was very nice. Yeah, and very supportive of the book, and after he turned everything in, every now and then he'd call me and we'd talk. We talked a lot about his friendship with James Dean in the 50s, because they were very tight friends. And he would always ask, well, how's it going? And it's going to be great. And he was really, really rooting for me, so it was wonderful. So I got some books in. This is a while back. I got the first batch of books in, and I wanted to take one over and give it to him. And I called him, and he said, oh, that's great, Lad. Oh, I can't wait to see it. I know it'll be great. I'm proud of you, and thank you. It was an honor for me to write the foreword for your book. I said, wait a minute. He got it's the other way around. It was an honor for you, for me to have you write the foreword. So he said, well, I tell you what, I'm busy for a couple of weeks. I got to take care of some things, but let me get back to you in about 2.5 weeks, and we'll meet for lunch, and, I can't wait to see the book. So a couple of weeks went by, and I was so busy with everything else. It was a Sunday evening, and I thought, oh, I better call him tomorrow and arrange to meet him. So I was on the phone with a lady, and I said, yeah, it's great. I got my books in, and Martin Landau wrote the foreword. And she said, oh, didn't you hear? I said, what? And she had apparently driven through Santa Monica near me and saw in a movie marquee in front of a theater, Martin Landau, rest in peace. And I went, oh, man.
Oh, that is.
Oh, dear.
That's sad.
I couldn't hand it to him, but I did talk to him. He knew about it. He was happy for me, wished me well. Lad, I'm proud of you. So, okay. So, in a way, no, it certainly is, and even more of a rooting section. The next day, I had lunch with Walter Koenig, who, as everyone knows, is Ensign Chekhov on Star Trek.
Right.
And Walter's connection with the show is interesting. And by the way, Walter wrote the afterword for the book, kind of a funny one, which was really well done. Walter Koenig's first lead role on a network television episode was in Mr. Novak in 1963. He played a Russian exchange student, and he's very good. And it turned out that 4 years later, the producers of Star Trek wanted to add a young, sort of sexy member of the Enterprise to get the teenage girl audience, somebody like Davy Jones of the Monkees.
Right.
And let's make him Russian because we're in a Russian space race, thing. And it turned out the casting director on Mr. Novak was the same one as the one on Star Trek. So the casting director said, well, I know somebody. Well, can he do a Russian accent? Yeah, here's some film on him. So they ran the Novak episode, and that, with a few other, things, helped him get Ensign Chekhov. So in a way, Mr. Novak gave us Ensign Chekhov. So I had lunch with him the next day, and he had met and known Marty, and he was, sad about it too. But he was very nice. He recorded a little video plug for my book, which is up on the MrNovak.com website, and very supportive, and he's loved the book. He thought it was great and very excited. And a nice thing that's going to happen is that next year, at some point, Warner Home Video is going to reissue the first season of Mr. Novak on a DVD set for the very first time. And I think once people start seeing the shows, because up to now it's sort of who you knew, sort of an underground thing, and it was among ultra collectors or that kind of thing. But this will be available for anybody to get. And I think when they see the shows, they're going to be knocked out. By the way, the shows are going to be remastered from the 35 millimeter camera negative, so they should look pristine. And I think what's going to be great is all the other great shows of the 60s, for example, the Twilight Zone, Dick Van Dyke Show, the Defenders, Perry Mason, or whatever it is, they've all been around. They reran in the 70s and 80s, and they were out on VHS in the 90s, and then, DVD, and now they're streaming and this sort of thing. Mr. Novak is a show that disappeared and was forgotten. So when it comes back, it's going to be new to nostalgia fans, and I think new to anybody that would like to see just a really well-produced, brilliantly acted, well-scripted, non-dated, relevant, entertaining, dramatic series. So it should be pretty exciting to see the reaction when this happens next year.
Yeah, that does sound exciting. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing it myself, because I've heard my sister talk about it, but I've never seen it either.
Yeah, well, it really holds up. It's a good show.
I got just a couple more questions, and then we can wrap it up here. Do you have any idea what your next project's going to be?
Well, maybe. It's still sort of in the formulative stage, but and I don't really want to do something next that's on the big scale of Novak, because that was almost a 3-year chunk of time, and I'm very grateful it's come out so well, and I'm batting 1,000 on reviews or opinions. Mm-hmm. But in 1961, in the summer, there was a 14-episode horror TV series called Way Out that most people have forgotten. In a way, kind of like Novak. And it was produced by David Susskind for Talent Associates, and it was hosted by Roald Dahl, the famous British author of Willy Wonka and James and the Giant Peach.
Right, of course.
And it was a 14-episode pre-taped live horror dramatic show filmed in New York. And what's interesting about that is, first of all, all 14 episodes survive. They're at the Paley Center for TV in Beverly Hills, in New York. And many years ago, there were about 5 episodes floating around on a VHS tape that were just horrible quality. You couldn't even watch them. They were so bad. But for some reason on YouTube, about a year ago, 10 of the episodes turned up, mostly pretty good quality. And so I had a chance to watch them, and I said, you know what? This is almost the same thing. This is really good. And there's nothing written on it at all, hardly ever. And I thought, okay, a modest, smaller book, I think that would be good. And apparently CBS owns the rights to it and probably doesn't realize what they have. And I thought, okay, well, I think I'm going to get a little book on it, and maybe I can talk to the people at CBS and convince them to give some serious thought to reissuing it, because in a way, Way Out is a junior cousin to The Twilight Zone. And ironically, it aired just before The Twilight Zone at that time. And the other horror shows of the time, Thriller, The Outer Limits, One Step Beyond, The Twilight Zone, are all out, all have books on them, and Way Out was sort of the little cousin that has been forgotten. And the interesting thing about Way Out is some of the shows are still genuinely scary. And at the time, some of the episodes were yanked from the air by program directors for being too frightening. And so that might be the next one. I'm still not entirely sure. I'm seeing how much material I can get. I have some, and it'll depend on how much I can find to justify it. But I think I'd like to do that because more people should know about Way Out.
Okay, that sounds like a really good project. Let me do another commercial here real quick. Chuck's latest book is available at Amazon.com, BearManorMedia.com, and at MrNovakBook.com in both paperback and Kindle. I will also have a link in the show notes in the book review section of SnarkyMovieReviews.com. Chuck, any plans to make an audible version?
I don't think so. That would be nice. I don't think so. I am pleased that Bear Manor Media does have a Kindle version. In fact, I just heard from a guy today that he's going to get the ebook. But you know what's great about this show? I'll tell you one or two little stories, if I may. This show was really loved by kids in the 60s. I mean, high school kids. And partially, especially girls, because he was so handsome, James Franciscus.
Right.
So in the course of doing the interviews, I contacted John Marshall High School, which is here in Los Angeles, which was where they filmed the pilot and subsequently used exteriors. There was another high school here, just down the street from me, called Hamilton High School that they used as well, but John Marshall High School was the main one. So early on, I put ads out in the alumni newsletters, any students remember being on Mr. Novak as an extra or memories, please get in touch with me. So I ended up hearing from about 20 of them. Some of them had a few things to say, but there was one in particular, and her name then was Laurie Georges, L-A-U-R-E, Laurie Georges. She's now Laurie Georges Gonzalez. She lives in Texas. And she's a lovely lady, sweetheart. And she told me she was in the pilot, and throughout the book I interview her, and she sort of symbolizes all of the teenage girls that love the show. And she told me an amazing story. She said when the show began, it was on Tuesday nights at 7:30 on NBC, and her girlfriends were all sad because their dads wanted to watch combat and they couldn't watch Mr. Novak, right? Right. So her dad worked evenings. So she asked her mom if she did her chores, could she have the girls over for Novak nights on Tuesday so they could all crowd in the living room and watch Mr. Novak? And the mother said yes. So for the next 2 years, it was like a popcorn and girls party, and they would go over every Tuesday night and watch the show and ooh and ah over him and discuss it. And loved it, and they all cried when it was canceled and the whole thing, and she's thrilled about the book, and she just is so true blue in her love for the show. I ended up partially dedicating the book to her. And in the book, I picture her student ID card from 1964, I think. And so anyway, that was great, because I could kind of see the show through her eyes as a teenage fan. There was another actress that I found kind of near the end of the run of the research. I was going through all the episodes to write my own review, which I have. I've rated each show along with original reviews. I have my own reviews, and I graded them since this is a school. Here's a B+, a C+, or, so forth. And I found an episode, and in it was a young African-American girl who was a really good actress. Her name was Allison Mills, and I went, did I try and reach her? So I went back to my list of actors, and I didn't. Well, I found her. Her name's Allison Mills Newman. She lives in Atlanta. She's a minister, and I managed to get her on the phone, and she was pleasantly shocked because that was, 52 years ago or whatever it was. And she was thrilled. She said, oh, yes, it was a great experience. Can you send me my episode? So I did. And she watched it, and we did an interview. And she told me an amazing story. She said at that time, she was part of an African-American theatrical acting troupe here in L.A. And there was an actor named Frank Silvera who ran it. And he ended up being on a Mr. Novak episode. Now, in those days, there weren't many parts for people of color in TV. And there was a role coming up on a Novak episode for a young African-American girl. So he recommended her. She went, she auditioned, she got the part. And she was thrilled. It was her debut in TV. So on the day of the shoot, she showed up with her mother, and she was acting opposite a character actress named Lois Nettleton, who's a brilliant actress. And she was so nice to young Allison and hugged her, and they did their scene, and all the crew applauded, and, they hugged each other. And at the end of the days shoot, the handsome James Franciscus, who Allison had a crush on, like every other teenage girl in America, came over and told her mother, "You have a fine actress there," and it was just about the most perfect day for a young teenage girl to start in TV. So about a month later, the show aired, and all 40 members of the troupe were huddled in her living room watching it, and at the end they all hugged her and cried, and she stayed up all night, couldn't sleep with excitement. And she ended up being a regular on the Julia sitcom with Diane Carroll in the late 60s, and then in the early 70s got the call of religion and moved to Atlanta, married, and now she's also an indie filmmaker. She teaches acting, she's a minister, and she's got a new film in preparation right now. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful story, because that's what I wanted to do in this. I just didn't want to write a cut and dry fact-type book about a TV series, and I have a lot of books, and sometimes it's, just facts. I wanted to have the human element in it. And I've interviewed over 50 people for it, and I tried to structure it where the interviews that I did, or interviews of the time, or writers of the time, actually told the story chronologically. And I'm sort of setting up each thing or commenting on it. And it seemed to work pretty well. I mean, you read it. What did you think?
Well, I thought it was an amazing book. I was going into it kind of blind, and I was overwhelmed at the amount of detail, the way you dealt with some of the controversies that went on in the show, and I really liked it.
Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah, I just need the Audible version because it's so hard to read now. It's hard to find time.
No, I understand, but it is what it is, and I tried again to structure it with there is a lot of information in, but I tried to present it in sort of a light conversational way, so it's not hammer, 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 hammer. Right. But it's just anybody I talked to was just so nice about it and so into it. And of course, now that there's the rough plans for it to come out next year, everyone's, some people were only in the second season, so they've got to wait, and hopefully if they sell enough of the first, they'll do the second. But everyone's very excited about it, and I really think when this comes out, Mr. Novak will take its place with the top shows of the 60s, and maybe for all time, because it was the first series to portray students and teachers and principals in realistic, dramatic fashion. Prior, it was sitcoms or, Dobie Gillis it was and nothing wrong with them. They were all very good. But this was a landmark, and it paved the way for later shows such as Room 222 or The Paper Chase in the 80s or that sort of thing. Right. And it is funny, in the 2 years, the show won over 47 awards for excellence from educational institutions. It won a Peabody Award, which is a very prestigious award. And the National Education Association even had a panel of teachers that would look through scripts to make sure they were correct. And this was all in a great way due to the creator-producer of the show, E. Jack Newman, who was a creative artist of the highest integrity. He'd written for years in radio. He'd done television. He did a great Twilight Zone episode called The Trouble with Templeton. That's a wonderful show. And it was his baby. And he went to high schools. He talked to teachers and students and really did his research and went all the way to make it the best possible show he could and as realistic as he could in the confines of, television in the early 60s. Right. And it's really his baby. And that hard work shows up now. And I'll tell you one other interesting thing, and this is for anybody who hears this that ends up watching them next year. The show was produced at MGM, which is a famous studio, as we know. And in 1963, MGM was not making very many new feature films. They tended to rent studio space, or they would buy films by other lesser companies and distribute them. So all of the A-list technicians were on salary and had to be put to work. So in the case of the Mr. Novak series, the cameraman, sound technician, set designer, lighting, all of that stuff are A-list motion picture first-class technicians, and it shows. And when you see them now, they're almost like more like little movies than an actual TV production.
All right, I'm getting kind of excited about seeing it now.
Well, all right.
Chuck, I want to thank you for taking the time for this interview. I really appreciate it, and I wish you much success with your latest book. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing me up on Snarky.
This is John. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you enjoyed that interview, and I'll be back right away with another movie review for you.